Hi, everyone. This conversation today is focusing on mindfulness for the modern teacher. And my name is Dr. K, otherwise known as Dr. Kelsey Evans-Amalu. My pronouns are she, her, and hers. I'm currently a professor at Georgia Southwestern State University, where I am researching and teaching future teachers. So a lot of what I do focuses on contemplative practices and ensuring that teachers have self-regulation strategies in their pockets, as teaching is a highly stressful career that can have a high rate of burnout. So using tools that we've been biologically given to facilitate us during our day in the classroom and outside of the classroom. So today's conversation will talk about exactly that and looking at contemplative practices, which is essentially an umbrella term for other types of mindfulness activities. And I'll be sharing a presentation with you in which we'll practice meditation, 3 different types of meditation that you could potentially use both in and outside of your classroom. So let's go ahead and get started. Again, I'll be sharing a presentation that has some strategies on here and defines exactly what mindfulness is and also what it isn't, as oftentimes it can get kind of confusing, especially since mindfulness is now a term that is highly used in just everyday language. But again, it's something that can be really, you can choose different strategies. So it doesn't have to solely be meditation. There's contemplative practices that could look like walking, that could look like moving our bodies, that could look like mindful eating, that could be prayer. All of these would be encompassed under the umbrella of what contemplative strategies and mindfulness is. So like I said, my name is Dr. K. I'm also a Vipassana instructor and also a yoga instructor as well. So I try to implement varied contemplative strategies in my own life, inclusive of both teaching meditation and also teaching yoga. And how we'll frame this conversation today, and I've already kind of suggested it with high rates of teacher burnout and teacher stress, is we look at the mental health side of things, where mental health is something that has continued to become more exacerbated, especially with the pandemic, where we've seen that the pandemic itself really took a something that was already an issue with stress and depression and anxiety, and we see it become a long-term emotional dysregulation, which can lead to post-traumatic stress disorder and even secondary post-traumatic stress disorder. So what was interesting to note, especially with us as a whole moving through the pandemic, now that we've been in this for almost 2 years, we can see that there are higher rates of PTSD because we've been in a constant state of dysregulation. So the brain, it's hard for the brain to differentiate between being chased by a lion and then being not chased by a lion. So something like even running late to class, or I can definitely attest to running late to go to teach. So it's hard to differentiate between that type of stress, between being chased by a lion and then running late for work. Your brain will respond in very similar ways because your brain is trying to keep you safe. So it's that fight or flight system that automatically kicks in. But when that fight or flight response is continually on and continually activated, we begin to see very similar results to what would happen when somebody comes back from war, or somebody moves through a massive hurricane, or anything that would be something that would create instability, any life event. So the pandemic showed very similar results to a national or global catastrophe. And our bodies and our minds are responding to this space. So this is how we frame why mindfulness is needed more, especially today in today's teaching, even more than 2 years before. So it's something that I strongly believe in. I've been researching it now since 2015, and I'm excited to say that mindfulness is becoming more and more integrated into the school system. Previously, we saw it a lot with K through 12 students, but now some school district, inclusive of school district that I'm currently working with up in Atlanta, they're starting to implement mindfulness for teachers because they're seeing the massive rates of burnout and stress that's occurring. And that's not meant to scare you. It's really the teaching profession and the institution of education needs to shift as well. But while we're in this space where the education and system is kind of shifting as we speak, we need to also take care of ourselves so that we can continue to maintain our own well-being. So you might be curious to know what exactly mindfulness means, since there are a variety of definitions. Mindfulness has existed for thousands upon thousands of years, and we see this in cross cultures and cross religions, where they are highly similar, but sometimes they might look like they're wrapping themselves in different packaging per se. So I've taken the modern mindfulness definition and put it on the screen. Why I say that this is modern mindfulness is, like I mentioned just a second ago, mindfulness has been around for thousands of years, and it's most often rooted in spiritual traditions. So in order to make this a more secular-based mindfulness strategy, a human named Jon Kabat-Zinn, which I always laugh at this because I feel like he has the most appropriate name ever for what he's doing in his life. Dr. Zen started researching a secular-based meditation strategy in hospitals for cancer patients up in Massachusetts. And he began to implement a program that he called mindfulness-based stress reduction. And how he implemented it was through an 8-week program, gearing folks through mindful walking, mindful eating, body scan meditations that were pulled from predominantly Vipassana tradition. So Vipassana means insight in the Pali language. And he saw that the benefits of the practice were highly beneficial for cancer patients, where they were able to offer more compassion for themselves, that they were able to be more aware and meet their pain with more kindness. So as he started to evolve this mindfulness-based stress reduction program, we come to terms with the new definition of modern mindfulness, which is seen on the screen. Mindfulness is the quality or state of being conscious or aware of something. And most oftentimes, the definition that you'll see from Jon Kabat-Zinn is being aware of the present moment without judgment. And I always like to speak into that very last component, the without judgment part, as that is the most difficult for me, especially since we often judge ourselves on a daily basis, myself included, even though I continue to practice mindfulness every single day. It is something that is so ingrained in our socialization, especially as humans, where we often judge and perceive things in the world around us because we're trying to keep ourselves safe. So it's a survival instinct. But then at the same time, especially through Western socialization, we have seen that this judgment mode has continued to go into overdrive. So it's something that is quite different to offer ourselves to release judgment. Judgment won't ever completely go away, mostly because your body and mind are still perceiving what is safe. But we can certainly start to recognize things as responding versus reacting. And maybe instead of noticing something and then immediately moving through anger, we instead meet this anger with kindness and a more rational response. So that's where mindfulness comes in. This is also used as a therapeutic technique, a mental state achieved by one's focus of the present moment while calmly acknowledging your feelings, thoughts, and bodily sensations. So we'll practice very briefly our first aspect of mindfulness with the breath. And this will be a very brief practice, about a minute long. And why I like to offer a very brief practice is this can be done in the classroom, especially in between classes, maybe while you're at lunch. You can also do it when you wake or when you go to bed. So this can be practiced anytime. Why mindfulness is so beautiful is that we are given our breath. This is something that is God-given or biologically given, in that we can use this tool that we have anytime and anywhere. So I invite you to practice this with me. And there's two things that I always invite practitioners or any mindfulness student to move into. That being choosing your seat first, and then choosing your gaze. When we choose our seat, we try to sit in an upright position so that we're able to stay awake. So this could be done in a chair, it can be done on the ground, anywhere that you feel comfortable, that you're able to feel your sit bones connect to whatever's holding you up or whatever's connected to the earth. So then once you've found your seat, we focus on our gaze. And again, from a trauma-informed sense, maybe you choose your gaze with the eyes open, or maybe you choose your gaze with the eyes closed. So this is a personal preference, whatever is feeling safe to you in the moment, and knowing that you can always shift the gaze during the practice as well. So once you find those two things, the gaze and your seat, we'll begin. We'll start with mindfulness of the breathing body. Just by offering ourselves a big breath in and an exhale out. Become more aware of your breath at the very tip of your nose. Noticing where the breath enters in. And the challenging part about this practice is that we are not controlling the breath, but we're simply acknowledging that we're breathing. If you feel that you want to try to control, just acknowledge that space. There's nothing wrong in doing that. It's just something to be aware of. So you're continuing to become more curious about your breath. You might notice that your mind might start to wander to different things other than the breath itself. And this is part of the practice of mindfulness. And that if we find that our breath is wandering, we gently bring it back to the focus of your breath. This aspect of continuing to come back, noticing when the mind starts to move to something else, offering kindness to ourselves, meeting ourselves with kindness. If we find that we're judging ourselves for having another thought pop in our mind, and kindly bringing it back to the curious breath. We'll take one more full breath here. And an exhale out. As you begin to open your eyes, if you had them closed, come back into the room, maybe with some gentle stretching into the neck. Just becoming more aware of where you're at. And noticing again, maybe rereading the definition, that we calmly acknowledge and accept our feelings, thoughts, and bodily sensations, even by being aware of the breath. Again, mindfulness is being aware of our present self without judgment and meeting ourselves in the present and acknowledging what pops up maybe in our mind with the past and future orientation, knowing that our body and mind will continue to pop around, as oftentimes we are planning or thinking ahead. Know that that's okay to pivot back to the present, that there's lesson learned along the way when we move towards future-oriented thinking, move towards past-oriented thinking, but then trying ultimately to bring it back to our present moment without judgment of ourselves. A few things into why we practice mindfulness, and this list can go on, and I'm just going to choose one for today's presentation, and that mindfulness is good for our hearts. And this is not just a physical aspect, but I'm speaking more into the emotional well-being of who we are, that when we begin to practice awareness of our emotions, which is quite challenging to do as a teacher, especially since sometimes in order to get through the day, it's almost like we perform like robots. And that's not always the most healthy option, but it's also an option that keeps us safe, especially if we have a busy day and then we begin to perform and go, go, go. But also keeping ourselves balanced and in equanimity by finding that balance of acknowledging our emotions and being kind to ourselves in the process. So something like a loving kindness practice, there's been tons of research that explains how loving kindness is a muscle that has to be worked. So compassion to ourselves has to be continually worked and repeated. And it's almost like you're lifting a weight to work your bicep out, that in order to continue to show up in compassion, we have to practice it. And this is not just inclusive of offering compassion to others. This is also inclusive of offering compassion to ourselves. And the two work hand in hand to continue to build this beautiful relationship. So offering both internally and externally, and kindness to our hearts and also to others' hearts. And mindfulness of emotions does just that. Other practices that we'll look at within this presentation, we've already done guided breath work. We'll look at a sensory activity next. And then we'll do some very brief mindful movement. And then we'll close with a brief loving kindness practice. So we already did the guided breath work. Other practices of self-regulation strategies could also be applied with your students as well. We'll look at the three senses. So just in this moment, offering yourself some curiosity about what are 3 things in the room that you're currently in that you can smell? This could be essential oils that you might have. I have some right here on my desk that I can smell. Maybe it is something that you made earlier. I have a microwave right around the corner, so I can actually smell the food that I made just about 20 to 30 minutes ago. Or anything might, other smells might pop up in the building that you're in. Just continuing to notice. Now acknowledging what are 3 things you can see. Taking a moment, looking around the room, noticing what is happening in the room itself. Maybe you notice different pictures, maybe you notice something on your desk, or even on the screen in front of you. Then finally, noticing what are 3 things you can feel. This could be applied to both a physical feeling or an emotional feeling. So maybe it's something that you can feel that you're wearing. I can feel the glasses touching my head. I can feel the shirt that I'm wearing. I can also feel my heartbeat when I place my hand on my heart. So these are 3 things. It's known as a 3 and 3. 3 things you can smell, 3 things you can see, and 3 things you can feel. Acknowledging 3 different aspects of ourselves that also help ground us. And this is a trauma-informed approach that allow us to sense what is going on in the moment, especially if we find that something has triggered us or maybe got us into dysregulation. And now we'll do a very brief mindful movement. And this can be done in a chair or in your seat. And we'll just work into the upper body to interlace the hands. Acknowledge the touch, the connection of your palms. And then on your exhale, press the palms away, maybe towards the front of your screen, getting a nice wrist stretch. This can be as brief or as long as you'd like it to be. But for the sake of time today, we'll just do a quick minute. Now on your inhale, lift your arms all the way up. Try to pull those shoulders down your back. Then lean towards one side, getting a side body stretch. Then towards the other side, breathing deep into your side body. Then on your next breath, drop back towards the center and hands down toward your heart. We'll take a very brief twist, twisting towards one side and twisting towards the other. And I personally love chair yoga. And come back towards the center and acknowledge any sensations that are happening in your body. Even with some very brief stretching, our body can respond and self-regulate, moving deeper into the parasympathetic state, that part of your central nervous system that allows that rest and digest state that's highly necessary as a teacher, especially since as a teacher, we're go, go, go all the time. Allowing ourselves to move from the go mode and finding the equanimity to find that rest as well. And we'll end today with a loving kindness practice known as RAIN. And why I really like the acronym of RAIN is it's, first of all, pretty easy to remember, but it allows us to inhabit this practice for life, where we allow ourselves to meet our doubts and our fears more with a deeply healing presence. That each time that we allow ourselves to slow down, we might start to notice that our fears, our hurts, our judgments, we can offer ourselves kindness to decondition the old habits of the mind and heart and anything that's limiting your beliefs and imprisoning your heart. So we'll move into this practice now. It'll take about 1 to 2 minutes. We enter in the same way that we did with our breath meditation. So choose your seat and choose your gaze. We begin with R. where we recognize what is happening right now. This could be something that is happening physically in your body, maybe recognizing what is happening in your mind. Anything at all. And upon this recognition, we allow life in this present moment to be just as it is. And this may feel more challenging to do, especially if we're feeling this sense of dysregulation, knowing that this moment will pass by, but acknowledging what our lived experience is right now. Not necessarily attaching to the lived experience, but still noticing and observing. And it's in this place that we investigate with a curious attention. So releasing any judgment from this investigation, and continue to notice how you're showing up in this present moment. And it may be something where you're continuing to ebb and flow into this present. And that's part of the process itself. And finally, the most important aspect of this meditation is nurture. We nurture this experience with loving presence, just as you would a child. How would you meet yourself if you saw yourself as a child? We would offer compassion to that person, maybe offer more grace, more kindness, more understanding or patience, but nurture your experience, whatever it is, and meet yourself with kindness. Some days this may be easier than others to meet ourselves with kindness in. Continuing to practice this and show up in this space to offer yourself that continued grace and radical compassion. You can continue to practice this even after this presentation. But we'll close this out with another big breath in and an exhale sigh out through your mouth. Just allowing yourself to again open your eyes, come back into the room that you're in, maybe do some gentle stretching. And we'll end today with just some contact information, as I know that this is a practice that can feel really challenging, sometimes frustrating. And know that you're not alone in that process, that I also experience that on a daily basis too. And it's why I continue to show up in mindfulness, and that it's a muscle that has to be continually worked, but also a whole lot of grace and support needs to happen as well. We can create community online, in person, or with a Sangha or community that you might personally create with your teacher community. So if you have any questions for me, please feel free to reach out. My contact is on the following slide. You can offer it on social, my website, or email. I hope that you found this conversation today enlightening, grace-filled, and restful. Please reach out with any questions and continue to go in loving kindness for yourself and for your fellow teachers.